Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the latest edition of Automatica Talks, a series in which we examine current technical and societal topics for automation and robotics users worldwide. Previous outings have discussed how the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated adoption of robotic and automation technologies in various industrial sectors, how the pandemic has influenced virtual commissioning of plants and processes, the role of interoperability in OPC UA, and in our latest outing, we took a look at the economic outlook on the world industry. The results of all of these talks are available on the Automatica website, so surf on by if you're interested in any of this. Today, we'll focus on the key topic of workplace skills with a topic called Next Generation Workforce Upskilling for Robotics. Susanna Bieler from the International Federation of Robotics will introduce the topic and the speakers in a few seconds. But before we start, let me provide an update on Automatica. As you all know, the trade fair was originally postponed from June to December. In fact, this event today was planned to be one of the on-site features in Munich. The COVID pandemic has put paid to this plan and the plans of all other in-person trade fair events in Germany for a while. As a result, the Messe Munich have decided to run the next full Automatica trade fair from June 21st to 24th in 2022. But today, the organizers have announced a new event format, which will take place exactly 1 year before the next Automatica trade fair. From June 22nd to 24th in 2021, in coming summer, Automatica Sprint will take place at the fairground in Munich. It is designed as a flexible trade fair concept with standardized stands, customer dialogue, hands-on exhibits, and centralized catering will form the core of the event, as the event concept builds on digital as well as in-person platforms. It will proceed regardless of vaccine and pandemic developments. For exhibitors, a range of standard stand designs from 20 to 200 square meters with a centralized stand builder should reduce planning time as well as risk. As well as the core traditional Automatica events around robotics, materials handling, vision systems, an international congress on robotics and artificial intelligence called Munich I will form a highlight of Automatica Sprint. The event is scheduled to take place in parallel to the well-established trade fair called Laser World of Photonics. In total, 6 fairground halls are reserved for laser and 3 will be reserved for Automatica Sprint. So there'll be much to see and experience in person in Munich next June. I look forward to seeing you all there from June 22nd to 24th. Just briefly to myself, my name is Ken Fui. I'm the editor-in-chief of VDI Nachrichten, Germany's weekly newspaper and media outlet for engineering. Our parent organization, VDI, is Europe's biggest technical and scientific community for engineers. The newspaper, with 140,000 copies, is Europe's leading technical weekly. Our website, Engineer.de, is Germany's premium career marketplace for engineers with about 1 million user sessions a month. So even in pandemic times, if you're looking for a new career opportunity or just want to know how your salary stacks up to your peers, surf on by and you can take a look there. Now we'll come to today's topic. The topic and the speakers or participants today will be introduced by Dr. Susanna Bieler. Susanna is General Secretary of the International Federation of Robotics. Susanna, over to you.
So a warm welcome also on behalf of the IFR to this IFR Executive Roundtable on upskilling the workforce and the next generation workforce. As you just seen in the little film of IFR with the key stats on the robotics market, the robotics market is growing every year. The operational stock is increasing, and thus is also the interest of potential customers and also the media on the robotics market and development. And with that, we also have an increasing discussion about how to make sure that no one is left behind by the developments. And one core answer to this discussion surely is we need to properly upskill and skill the workforce, today's workforce, as well as the workforce of the future. And that's why we are here for. And this is also why the IFR has published a positioning paper yesterday, actually, just in time for this roundtable. It's on the topic of next generation skills, enabling today's and tomorrow's workforce to benefit from automation. You can download this positioning paper for free from the IFR website at just using this QR link you're seeing here in the screen, or if you go to www.ifr.org, you can also access it directly. And I think we can also share the link to the website through the chat for everybody. Yeah, and I'm happy that we could gather a good panel, a great panel, to discuss the issues of next generation workforce and upskilling. We originally planned, as Mr. Fuhr already said, to host this event as a virtual, as a physical event in Munich at the Trade Fair Hall. Now we have to change to a virtual event, but nevertheless, I'm happy to introduce the panel to you. First is Jeff Bernstein. Jeff Bernstein is the president of the Association for Advancing Automation. Under this roof, there are 3 different associations, among them the Robotics Industry Association, the American Robotics Association. In his among his associations, he combines 1,200 global companies involved in robotics, vision, artificial intelligence, as well as motion and motors. He's working for the RIA since 1983, and he's a very skilled commentator in the media, as well as in this kind of panel discussions. He's very acknowledged to talk about the impact of automation on jobs and the future of automation beyond the factory floor. And he's also at the same time member of the executive board of the International Federation of Robotics. Welcome, Jeff. Second on the panel is, there he is. Second on the panel is Anna Bihovskaya. She's a senior policy officer at the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the OECD. For those of you that do not know that TUAC very well, that's the interface for the trade unions to the OECD, representing more than 58 million workers in OECD countries and some associate members as well. And Anna is covering topics like digitization, digital economy, future of work policies, and also including labor market, organizational change, AI, and platform economy. So welcome, Anna. Third on the panel is Mike Chico. Mike Chico is the president and CEO of FANUC America. For those of you that are not yet, if there's someone in the audience that's not yet familiar with FANUC, that's one of the major robot manufacturers in the world. The headquarters based in Japan. So Mike is also serving as a senior managing officer of FANUC Corporation in Japan. He's with FANUC since 1999. There's some disturbing noise. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Suzanne.
Last on the panel to welcome is Felix Rohn. Felix Rohn is a policy officer with the European Commission. He's with the DG Employment, and he had several. He's with the Commission since 1998. He had had several positions within enterprise, higher education, and also vocational training before he now joined the Skills and Qualifications unit. And so his unit is in charge of core topics like the Pact for Skills, the Blueprint for Sectorial Cooperation on Skills, and also the European Skills Agenda. Welcome, Felix. So now I hand over back to Ken Pui to start the discussion.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to meet all of you, and I look forward to our discussion on next generation workforce upskilling for robotics. The format today, I've prepared a number of questions which we'll chat about with the panelists, but this is also meant to be an interactive format. So you've got the opportunity to pose your questions, depending on what we talk about, or also questions from completely not off topic, but a little bit off center. You can put all of your questions into the chat window, and we'll get to those later in the session. I'll pick them out one at a time and pose them then to the panelists. We'll also make sure that you're interactively involved. We've prepared a couple of questions for you, our audience, and we'll come to that in a few seconds. But first of all, coming to the panelists, what do you think? Will we see a lot more robots in operation on shop floors in the near future? Will we see different robots in operation? What's your opinion there?
Well, maybe since I work for the robot company, I'll start, Jeff. Maybe you can...
I was going to give you that one, Mike. You're looking.
And hopefully for our business, the answer to that question is yes. We do see a lot more opportunity for robots on the floor. It's been happening as with the introduction that happened from the IFR. You've seen that the operational stock of the robots has really increased every year. We're starting to see more and more industries. You know, the robotics industry really started in the automotive sector of industry, and we've seen it just continue to grow in terms of all sorts of other industries around the world. So for sure, we see a trend in increasing automation. In terms of how that's happening, I think a lot of it tends to center around how easy this automation is to use and how many people are trained, which is going to get into our discussion today. But I think more and more we're getting more and more training and skilled people around the automation, and then in a parallel sense, the robots and automation are becoming easier and easier to use. And I think this is accelerating the adoption of the robots overall. And I think we'll get into it later about why that's happening. But for sure, the number of robots are getting increased as time has gone on.
Perhaps, Jeff, building on what Mike has just said, will we see, coming away from the automotive industry, will we see different types of robots in operation in manufacturing in the future, or is it already there? Where are we today?
Well, thanks for the question, Ken. We're already seeing different types of robots. So the kind of robots that Fanuc is making have changed over time in other companies. You had big industrial robots that had to be separated from people. Now you have what are called collaborative robots working side by side with people. You have mobile robots that are completely transforming industries like warehousing and distribution. And as a result of that, these innovations are allowing robots to work in more industries than ever before. I mean, we're seeing them in agriculture, of course, automotive and electronics, pharmaceutical, food. Just about every industry you can think of now is looking for ways to adopt robotics and artificial intelligence and all the new technologies they're developing. So I agree with Mike that we're going to see a lot more robotics coming out of the pandemic as companies recognize that the technology can help them become more competitive no matter what industry they're in.
What about the bigger trends in robotics that foster future development or future adoption of this? Anna or Felix, can you address that topic? Or are you too far away from the robotics industry to say, hey, we'll get to you in a second?
Exactly. I'm too far away from the robotics industry because we are dealing with higher education, with vocational training. So our policies have educational fields, address educational fields, but then they are even making qualification transparent across borders. So I don't have knowledge of many sectors.
Let me come directly then to a question for maybe both you and Anna can deal with this topic is, what impact will automation have on the skills requirements of the current and the next generation workforce?
I mean, if I just wanted to, first of all, agree with Jeff and Michael, and it's sort of that we see, I mean, I am far away from the implementation stage of industrial robotics in sectors. But what we definitely see, and this is just to confirm, is a spread and an increase in both process and product innovation in recent years across sectors, definitely a spike in the agricultural sector, a continuous rise in manufacturing, obviously, but also across sectors. And we see that emerging as a greater challenge in terms of both upskilling and reskilling, but also in terms of obviously automation and the employment impact on it. What we see also is that it depends what kind of production and automation it is and what kind of product inputs are being used together with the different robotic systems, since that affects the labor input and it affects the skilling and upskilling needs. So I thought that's also important to mention, and it also relates to the fact how these systems are being implemented at the firm level is also important to consider in our discussion today in terms of then what needs to be done further to support workers in that regard.
Yeah, Anna, if I could leverage off that, that's an important topic because what we'll talk about today is that in manufacturing, there are certainly so many tasks that only people can do that can't be automated or easily automated, or it's better for a person to do. And so from a labor standpoint in a factory, you have operations that are still dedicated for people, you know, wiring of harnesses or inspection of complex things and stuff like that. And then you have the component of operation and programming and maintenance of the automation itself. And so from a labor component, it's important to understand that within a manufacturing sector, you're going to still have human operations that need to be done, but then you have a level of workers that need to still then program and maintain and operate the automation itself. So it really does have two sides, as you mentioned.
We'll get to the how in a couple of seconds, but coming back to the original question here, what skills will be particularly important now for the workforce? Perhaps Felix, if you could address that, how you see that in terms of automation and robotics.
Repetitive routine tasks will be clearly not be done by people anymore. So the trend is that low-skilled people will be replaced. Even also a relatively simple accountancy task will be replaced, not by robots, but by algorithms. So people have to, these people that are at risk to lose their employment have to, of course, to upskill, and they have to concentrate on tasks, on capacities that automation and robots cannot do, which are human, cognitive, non-cognitive, monitoring, critical thinking, problem solution, to look for solutions for problems. Also emotive, in fact, capacities to work in a team of such middle up to high skilled workers, blue and white collar.
I really want to jump in with the how question now, but before I do that, I'd like to pull the audience in. We've prepared a couple of questions to see how the audience looks at these topics, and we've had the first couple of answers from our panelists, but let me ask the audience, and we'll put in the question will be on the screen in a couple of seconds. But here you see, would you recommend your children pursue a career in manufacturing? Your little boy, your little girl, what do you think? Should they get into manufacturing? Yes, absolutely. Yes, under certain conditions, and definitely no way. So what do you think? Give us your opinion, and we'll put the answers on the screen here in a couple of seconds. So how does it look? Yes, under certain conditions. Okay, that's all the guys sitting on the fence and not jumping one way or the other. Personally, I would have said yes, absolutely, but you know, I'm the minority. No, not at all. That's all. I didn't know there were any lawyers or accountants here in the session, but obviously there are some. Okay, let's take the second question. Do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic has increased the need for workplace skills? So the COVID-19 pandemic, how has that affected the skills in the marketplace? No, I don't think this topic is relevant at all. It's equally important than before. Or yes, due to the pandemic, this topic has risen in relevance. Bear in mind also the results here are just a snapshot. They have absolutely no statistical relevance. Okay, can we see the answers? Yes. So if that didn't turn out to be the answer, we could have ended the panel discussion right now, because we're going to move on to say, how can we make sure that people are not left behind? And that's the next section of questions or topics I want to talk about with the panelists. So let me address that question to you. How can we make sure that people are not left behind? What opportunities are there for low-skilled workers, and what skills will they be able to acquire in the future? So how do you see that? Felix, Anna, you want to go first?
Yeah. Me? Okay. Yes, we know that in Europe there are considerable numbers of people, about a third, that lack numeracy, literacy skills, so basic skills. They also lack digital skills. Here the numbers are even higher, about 40%, or lack basic digital skills. So there we have to do something, because these people are more and more, as our industry and our economies evolve, are at risk to lose their jobs. So they have to learn these things, and they have to do it in continued professional training. But at the same time, unfortunately, this group is the group which is mostly not inclined to learn. And there, yeah, I pass over to Anna, in fact, because we think that the social partners have to play a very, very important role to motivate these people to learn new skills and to upskill. And about the skills which become more and more important, in fact, we talked about it before.
Yeah. No, thank you, Felix, for the great entry point for me. I think, first of all, in terms of the willingness and the motivation to upskill, reskill, and the incentives to do so, they are very much correlated, because many low-skilled or even middle-skilled workers who are very much affected by the introduction of industrial robotics, AI systems, IoT, whatever it is, all are not used to, first of all, obtain too much training during their working lives traditionally. That's the first. So there is already a cultural sort of, I don't know, framework that is not necessarily inviting to retrain. Then otherwise, other than that, you don't have the financial incentive as a worker very often to take up training. So you have all those training offers, but you do not know if you can still obtain your wage or a percentage of your wage when you go for a training course. If it is not a short-term training course, obviously, if it is a matter of taking a course of 4 days, you probably can negotiate that with your employer, and your employer is probably encouraging you to do so. I'm talking more about more fundamental longer-term courses for which you really need to take time off work. So here you don't have, in all countries, at least in all OECD countries, you do not have the financial incentives. You do not necessarily have the right to take time for training unless your employer encourages you to. If you as yourself as the employee say, I would like to obtain more non-routine skills so that I can operate your new machine that you put in the production line, if your employer doesn't say yes to that, you cannot take the risk of taking a training outside of your workplace. I think that's a problem. A problem is also that most OECD countries, at least, and beyond the OECD, do not have dual VAT systems. And dual VAT systems obviously are more, more prone to be able to serve as training grounds and fertilizing grounds to develop new skills. And in terms of social partners, we can just see that there is a correlation between collective bargaining coverage and the willingness of employers to invest in training. So for me, it's not necessarily a matter of the technology producers who provide the technology of being responsible for providing the training. For me, it is about the employers working with trade unions, workers' representatives to encourage more uptake, to make sure the financing mechanisms are there and the time for training is there. This is very broad, what I just said, but I don't want to take up too much time answering that question.
2 short comments to Anna's comment. Yes, I would not say only dual vocational system, because this is one way of work-based learning. I would say work-based learning is important. You can organize this also in other ways than in the dual system, but of course the dual system clearly has its merits, but other possibilities, like in the Netherlands, they do lots of work-based learning in the schools. But again, the social partners are in the game. So, and then as you talked about incentives, also financial for learning of the skilling of the workforce. We are exploring at European level the idea of individual learning accounts, and accounts is also meant in the financial sense. But we are just exploring. But in fact, in France, and you are based in France, they have that already.
Yes, if I may, I mean, the French system is there. The uptake is not great. And this is, I mean, for now, but there is a chance that the uptake gets better. The problem with individual rights is that you need to be a full-time or regular employee to be able to, accumulate those rights. So everybody who is self-employed, who is on non-standard contracts, etc., already sort of not falls out of the system, but has more difficulties to obtain this right. But again, it is a good system, but the employer has to grant you time to be able to profit from your accumulated training account that you have in France. So you still have to go together.
We'll come in a couple of seconds to comparing and contrasting different national approaches. but I'd like to bring Mike and Jeff into the discussion on this. You're coming at it from the other side. You're the technology provider. What can you do to ensure that people aren't left behind? Or what do you actively do? I know obviously at FANUC you have a lot of, in Japan, a lot of courses for your own people, but what do you do for your customers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So maybe first and foremost, I think one of the challenges that everyone faces when we talk about upskilling labor in terms of automation is there's this mindset that robots are really hard and technologically advanced. And so taking a low skilled person and upskilling them into robotics seems like this major jump of skill. And I think it's important to understand that upskilling labor, even low skilled labor, upskilling that into this business, there's many, many levels that you can take. So you can take a low skilled labor and upskill them into, say, a general operator's role, where that person just needs to follow a certain easy set of guidelines to ensure that the system that they're presented continues to run. You can upskill that further into a maintenance role. You can upskill that further into a programming role or a further maintenance role. And so I think that there's a general fear in the marketplace because people talk about robots and automation, and you typically see somebody with a lab coat on and pushing buttons and seeming really smart, but there's a lot of different levels in which to upskill. So right off the bat, I think that's important. You can see here, I'm sitting in one of our training rooms, and I'm actually in one of our smaller ones because a lot of the larger ones are filled right now, trying to space people out. So we're actually currently training many people here. I'm in America, I'm in Detroit currently. But as you mentioned, Ken, FANUC trains our people all over the world. Both Felix and Anna both mentioned, and I feel strongly about this, that there needs to be a relationship between industry and the unions and government, and then the end customers, as well as us as a technology provider, that there needs to be a relationship. And that's one of the things that is changing quickly, is building those bridges in between industry and academia to focus on this challenge that we have, because it is a big challenge.
Jeff?
Yeah, it's an enormous challenge, and all of those stakeholders have to be involved. But in some sense, it has to start much earlier. It has to start in the educational system. You know, a lot of people my age talk about when we went to school, there were hands-on classes, shop class. You had to actually build something. That's all gone from schools today. And so one of the most popular things in terms of robotics is the FIRST robotics program. You know, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of students participate in this outside of school. It's an after-school activity. How do you build at an early age people's technical skills at some level, starting early, so that they're fully acquainted with the opportunities that exist, and that they're getting the kinds of educational opportunities to learn. So that's one area that needs to be looked at least in the United States, more closely. The second thing is, when this goes to the technology providers, we have to make it easier. Anna was talking about courses, and Felix was talking about courses and training and going and reading books and doing all these things. But there's new technologies out, whether they're augmented reality, virtual reality, that allow people with minimal skills to put on headsets, learn how to do some operation. It tells you if you did it right. That would speed up the skilling, the upskilling of people. And a lot of this technology is available now. When you talk about people being left behind, okay, this is a personal issue for me. I have no technical background. I've been working in robotics since 1983. I have no technical background at all. Yet, I add some value to this industry, I hope, because there are lots of ways that people can be involved in an increasingly automated world. It can be in design. It can be in communications. It can be in marketing. It can be in product development. We need to make sure that there's a home for everybody, including people like me with no technical background. So while we have to focus on science, technology, engineering, and math, we can't forget the arts either. This industry, if it's going to fully take advantage of all the people out there who can contribute, needs to be a big tent, and I think we can do that.
Will that what you spoke about there? Will this technological development lead to more inclusion or more exclusion in the workplace? Obviously, those people who adopt and adapt will benefit, but is there not a big danger that those who do not will fall even further behind?
I don't think so. You know, I'm more optimistic about this. And the reason is, one of the real issues in robotics has been, from the beginning, it was dominated by certain application areas: welding, material handling, you know, inspection, those types of things, assembly. One of the real challenges is, how do we figure out new applications for the technology? And we've seen it. We've seen, you know, hamburgers or chicken being made, or you can order a smoothie or get a coffee that somehow involves robotics. But people are using their minds to figure out new applications, and then ultimately we need to figure out how to use our intelligence to figure out how we make it help us in our personal lives. Aging populations, how do we have it assist us in our homes? The home has been a very difficult barrier for everything but a vacuum cleaner so far. We have a long way to go in taking advantage of this technology to make our lives better. And I think we can do that. And I think that will be more inclusive going forward.
How much of a role does the human interface, human-machine interface, play in this? What impact will developments there have on the collaboration of workers and robots? And how will this affect the necessary skill sets that the workers need to have?
Yeah, I think that one, Ken, it's you've heard this maybe in other speeches before, but we relate things to our phones quite a bit, and the type of smartphones that we may have. So you hold a very complex device in your hand or in your pocket a lot, but the interface to that device tends to make it very easy, where there's no instruction manual even anymore. The phone just powers on, and even a child can operate it or learn how to use it. And the same thing goes with the interfaces that are on automation, where previous generations of robots did tend to be very complex, where the operation of those robots were complex, and the interface was complex. But with some of the new technology today and the advancements in human-machine interfaces, we are able to take very complex things and make them very easy to use. And then even now today, there are interfaces out there where it enables the operator to just literally go out and reach and touch the automation and move the robot around, or interface virtually with that. Jeff mentioned augmented reality, and we do see this as an advancement going forward to just make things easier to use, where you might hold up a device and just point it towards the automation, and the device really tells you what's wrong, or the augmented reality tells you what to do. And so these advancements, I think, will lower the bar or increase the adoption of low-skilled or the ability to upskill labor in this technology, in this field, the high technology field that we're in.
Okay, let's zoom back out a little bit. Look 5 to 10 years into the future. Paint me a picture of how the factory of the future will look in your opinion. And Mike, you go last with this one because you've already built the factory of the future. Let maybe Felix and Anna go first. How do they see manufacturing looking in factories in 5 to 10 years time?
Okay, well, let me start, because I paint you a simple picture. No, it really depends on which factory and which country is it and what does it produce, frankly. So you cannot give one uniform answer to that. I feel like in an ideal world, you would have systems where you still have obviously inbuilt human oversight, which is a key demand that we have, at least when it comes to any digital implementation in any sector. If you have that secured so that you have this human oversight, it obviously creates, as somebody already mentioned, enough tasks for people to go after and to take care of. So with that in mind, then you would also have augmented reality, virtual reality systems to support you in doing some of those tasks, whereas other workers will be able to manage and oversee the processes, co-create, maybe innovate on top of the systems that their firms bought and introduced, maybe innovate, co-create based on that and add on different innovations, etc. I feel like that's the ideal picture. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, because what my fear would be, especially in regards to the current economic situation and the couple of years that we had ahead of us that are economically very tense, very severe, is that some firms in an uncontrolled environment, especially where unions, I have to say, are not involved, will go ahead and try to automate faster to save labor costs in their thinking to save their own budgets. But whereas in reality, all studies that we see show that if you automate too fast and you get rid of workers, you do not necessarily enhance your productivity or the quality of your products. So that's the fear that I have a little bit, that some firms, and I hope these are only a few, will go that way, and then you don't have this great ideal reality that I painted when I first came in.
Felix?
Well, I'm not a specialist in robotics, but okay, I've read, of course, studies, and well, I see lots of machine-supported human work, where the machine and the person, the worker, build an entity. And you know better about these things than me, and I think that that people with this crisis we had, that many people have in fact detected that they, in fact, yes, we have learned a lot, and I can imagine that people got the incentive to learn also other things, because they detected this capacity to, well, their digital skills. That we saw a big boost. And in that respect, I'm optimistic. Yes, as Anna said, it's also important that companies are clear about the fact that the workers they have are in fact assets. And if they overlook it, I expect that such firms will be punished in the future, in particular in the industrialized world, where the demography, is quite obvious. It's going down. So if you do not keep your workers, then you will lose out. That's what I think.
So Jeff, how do companies remain attractive in the factory of the future in 5 to 10 years and provide attractive workplaces as related yet now by Anna and Felix, because we're not there yet.
Well, first of all, let me say that the robots are tools to help the people. The people are first. That has to always be the situation. The second thing is we have sort of a blueprint of what happened during the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. When we came out of that Great Recession, the world started automating with robotics in ways we had never seen before. It skyrocketed. And what happened to employment during that period? It skyrocketed. In the United States, we got to a point where unemployment was so low that there were more open jobs than there were people looking for work. Now, the technology has changed the type of jobs, but in many cases, it's changed it for the better. So when you talk about the factory in 5 to 10 years, What you are going to see is people doing less labor-intensive, repetitive work, I think, overseeing machines, likely, but oftentimes these are better, safer, and higher-paying jobs that people really should be doing. And we've seen this over the history of robotics. We used to have people working in paint booths. We took those people out of those terrible environments and put robots in there, and all sorts of applications. And the challenge is, obviously, to upskill the workers so that they can do those jobs. But as these companies became more competitive over the past decade by using automation, employment grew because the companies were more successful. Had those companies not have automated in a world in which everybody is racing to automate, the Chinese went from basically nowhere on the map in automation to #1 in use of robotics. If you don't do it, and if you don't solve those challenges of bringing the people along, you're going to have much worse situation from an employment level. That's our view.
That sounds like a very positive picture for the robotics manufacturers. Mike, I remember visiting, the first time I visited Fanuc in Japan was more than 20 years ago, and they had lights out manufacturing, were making, robots, were building robots even back then. And, you had 300 workers in the entire place. And for me, that was a real revelation back then. What's Fanuc working on now, comparing it to what the picture that we've just pictured?
Yeah, this is the panel that's pulled together here and the different perspectives on what the factory of the future looks like is really good. And I appreciate everyone's perspectives on this. And I think everyone's right in their own way in terms of what the factory of the future looks like. I think everybody's recognized that people and actual workers are very important. I mean, even the room I'm sitting in today isn't for robots, it's for people. It's to teach people how to use these machines. And I think Jeff put it very well, is that manufacturing is changing. And the jobs that are available in manufacturing are going to be different. And they're hopefully, in my opinion, and hopefully others' opinions, that they're going to be different in a good way. They're going to be less dangerous. They're going to be less dirty or dull. We say that all the time in terms of automation. And so we're trying to take monotonous, not rewarding, low paid jobs, and really those are the focus on the automation. And so for us, I think that the factory of the future is one where there are less repetitive tasks done by people, but that doesn't mean there's less people. It does mean probably that we can make more things with the same amount of people, or maybe we can make many more things with fewer people doing those dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs. But as we've proven, and this has happened factory after factory, that if you automate properly, and Anna, you brought this up, that there are people that have tried to over automate or get into areas that that are probably putting their factories at risk. But if done properly, we've seen factories be able to produce more, do it safely, and do it with the same amount of people that they did before. And so the people that are there are well compensated, better paid, have more rewarding jobs. And then the one tidbit I'd like to add, maybe just for the future, is the one thing for sure that we see the factories becoming is more connected. And so maybe the factory itself can be viewed remotely, or that there are people that can view multiple factories from a single location. Just like the technology we're using right here, where we represent 4 different countries where we're talking, and we're probably talking to people from a dozen other countries right now. I think the factories are already heading down this path where we're able to operate or monitor or look at things and have connected devices in factories for all over the world and be able to view that. And that's a lot of what you saw 20 years ago when you were at Fanuc, is a lot of where we're headed today, of becoming more connected, and enabling a broader scope of what's happening on the factory floor from remote areas.
In terms of skills and upskilling, why is it important to act now? Change is happening anyway. What will happen if we just wait and see what the future will bring? You know, so que sera mentality. It's going to happen anyway. Let's wait and see. Why actively go out and court it?
Yeah, I think it's important. Jeff brought up the recession that happened in 2008 and 2009. And what happened in that, and I think what the risk of waiting is something that did happen during that time, is there was a mass exodus of people from the manufacturing industry. And it was because manufacturing stopped or was severely receded in the recession, and people found other things to do. And we've seen that over time. We saw that in the 1900s in the farming industry, and we've seen it through different workers in the automotive industry, that people will find a place to be. And unless we prepare this industry for the factory worker of the future, then we will be hurt, because people will find other things to do, and we have the risk of further reducing the amount of skilled labor that even is already reduced because of demographics and because of generational issues that we have. We're fortunate in America to have a triangle-shaped demographic in terms of a lot of young people coming up, but other demographics aren't as lucky as what we have in the United States. So I think the big risk is that manufacturing will be hurt. And as Jeff mentioned, manufacturing is going to happen, but it's going to happen in the place that's able to do it. And so for all the countries listening online, that, if you enjoy a manufacturing business in your country, you have to prep for it. Otherwise, manufacturing is going to leave and it may never come back. And there's a lot of examples of that around the world and throughout time, where once something leaves that country or area, it's really hard to get it back over time. So I think that's what the big wait and see risk is that you could potentially lose, and your region or area or country could be severely hurt for a long time.
Okay, I think we would have consensus on that, but who should be in charge of mastering this change? Is it the companies themselves, manufacturers, technology users, governments, trade unions, clergy, God? Who's going to do it for us?
All of them.
Let's not bank on God on that one. No, I'd say all of them, obviously, again, in an ideal environment. Just to pick up on what Mike just said, it is important to consider what happens at the workplace, first of all. A lot is being learned at the workplace, even when something is introduced. So let's not underestimate that either, that something can be learned straight up upon the introduction of a technology. I think here there is a responsibility with the producers, with the providers of the technology, to provide explainability around their products, to provide guidance as to what do their products do, obviously, but also what does the worker do in tandem with these products, because that will then help design or redesign workplace training. That will help the employers, that will help the worker representatives also to know what they need to claim for their members as well. So I think that's one point. The other point is obviously that when you look at the whole skills ecosystem, it has many actors that play a big role, and you need money to be able to reskill, upskill, modernize educational systems related to what Jeff said earlier regarding how to modernize school systems and bring back some of the technological content to, just for example, to secondary education. Here we need funding, and here what we see, systems work well where you have governments together with social partners establishing funds, training funds for adult workers, but also for apprenticeship systems, etc. and allocate those funds accordingly, depending on the sectorial needs, because most of these funds are located within sectors, so that there is a more granular, tailored approach at hand already, and where this money is being distributed where it's currently needed. But in order to prepare the systems of the future, there needs to be a rethinking of that as well, to be honest. Because clearly we don't have enough adults right now in training already. We have some successful best practices where the introduction of robotics works extremely well in some sectors with some firms, whereas in others it just doesn't. And the missing link here is preparation, is the explainability of the products and the thoughtful introduction of those products on everybody's ends, and then consultation over how we need to reshape training and learning, and how we maybe also need to certify skills better in terms of those skills obtained via remote learning, for example, or those skills obtained on the work. Some of these competences are being then overlooked, so it becomes hard for the employee, for example, to claim better tasks at their own job, because they say, I can do it, and the employer or the hiring employer doesn't believe that because it has not been certified yet. Things like that are still sort of in limbo and have not been resolved in the big lifelong learning ecosystem governing space. But I would say everybody has to chip in with their different sort of things that they can bring to the table to make it better and to make training uptake and training as such more effective, and that it would lead to this scenario that Mike was describing of actually more workers coming in to work alongside the machines and not less.
Okay, there are a bunch. The reason I'm looking over to the right here is there's a bunch of questions running in here. I'll take the questions from the audience. Keep writing them into the chat. I'll take them in a couple of seconds. But building on that, Anna, we talked about different regions and different educational systems. Are there countries that are better prepared than others? Where should we look to look for something that others can learn from? We've got many countries here represented here, lots of experience. Where are the best practices in the world?
Are you asking me or Felix, maybe?
I'm asking all of you.
Okay.
In fact, the main elements, Anna already named the main elements for a good cooperation for education and training of people. So if you have that in place, you are, as a country, you are already well placed. But for that, you also need a real social partner cooperation. This is what we can see from a European perspective, where in countries where the social partner relationships are still conflictual, potentially conflictual, let's say an heritage of the past, I hope, it does not work so well. You have less apprenticeships. You have industry less investing in vocational schools with equipment which we see in Michael's training room, for example. Yeah? So these are then, if you want best practices, if you take, because Netherlands, for example, they have practiced this what they call triple helix cooperation, where at regional level, where they have assembled the regional government around the table, education and training, even the social affairs department, the trade unions, and of course, last but not least, education and training providers. And in the Netherlands, they have also a specialization strategy where regions also pick from a list of national priorities, also economic sectors, where they say this is our strength. And then all these players were working to even amplify this competitive advantage of the region in that economic sector. And that way, for example, in water and management, they created then the sector, all players then also created games, for example, for primary and secondary schools. So they reached out, the sector reached out together with to education and training, and so they rose awareness for the sector. You could do the same as the robotics sector. If you would, the companies in a region are provided with kind of game packages where, as Jeff in fact mentioned, you did something like that, if I understood correctly. You reached out to schools, right, and to pupils. And if you do this, there you can attract young people when they are still not decided. If you are starting with upper secondary education, often it's already too late. And then there's another thing, this is more on the regulatory side, an example from Poland, because the statistics then prove that the approach was right. They reintroduced as compulsory natural sciences and mathematics until the how to say in English, grade A, baccalaureate, Abitur. So before it was not compulsory, and then they said, no, everybody has to do it until the end. And after some years, they could see in the statistics that the numbers of students who opted for a technical or natural science academic subject going up, clearly going up. And this is, of course, then the pool where manufacturing can recruit.
That's what I love about these talks. You learn something new every day. Those examples with Poland and Netherlands I didn't know of. Great. We've got so much experience here. Please share where you think you've experienced the best practices. Jeff, you were spoke.
Yeah.
Anna?
Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, okay. No, just this is more to complement what Felix already said. I feel like we see best practices where there is, I already said that numerous times, stronger social partnership, but especially, I mean, just to give you more concrete examples where you have negotiated agreements, for example, on less working time for training. Concrete examples in the manufacturing industry in Germany, for example. You have the example, it's extremely famous, and I'm sure you all heard about it by now, of the Swedish job security councils, which are sectorial bodies managed only by social partners, so governments are not involved. There is a regulation that manages, that sort of upholds these systems, but governments are not involved. And these councils, in the event of layoffs or restructuring, provide not only training and a network for re-employability, but they also provide career guidance. And I think this is something that we haven't talked about, because career guidance obviously doesn't need to be career guidance for the unemployed. It also can be career guidance for the employee to know what they should reskill and upskill for. And here you have a lot of trade union or social partners activities as well, where they act as mentors, where they act as the providers of career guidance, or where they could act as union learning representatives, such as in the UK, that achieve great results, for example, to bring lower skilled workers into upskilling activities. They have great numbers that speak for themselves, for example, where you have actively union representatives going in at the firm level, doing interviews, doing sourcing, and then negotiate with the employers to then free up those workers to get the skills that the employer would also benefit from. And I think that's precisely important to encourage more countries, more systems to go in this direction, to build a sort of a nexus, a supportive nexus to enable this sort of training uptake. But I also think that there are systems in countries, especially in Asia, I'm thinking of Japan, where the acceptability of the introduction of some of these technologies is much higher, so that the tradition to upskill and work alongside those systems is much more enshrined in societies, so that it comes much more natural than, let's say, in other countries. I'm not saying that this is the ideal, but it's still, there is a major difference between these types of systems and others that are more, say, traditional in a sense. But yes, in my opinion, there needs to be a co-design, co-management of the upskilling challenges together with the robotic industry, together with the social partners and governments where possible.
And I think the regional level is very important. So we are about following this example from the Netherlands. We at the European level have are now supporting centers of vocational excellence, which work at regional level. And but they shall also cooperate among themselves across borders, which would be platforms of centers of vocational excellence. The European Regional Development Fund is funding regions that develop and implement smart specialization strategies, and they are also connected across borders when they are working in the same sector, and there are also smart specialization regions in manufacturing and even in robotics. So this is also something that is interesting. And last but not least, this is our most important initiative and most recent one is the Pact for Skills. In Germany, you would say Qualifikationspakt. And the Pact for Skills is high on the agenda, and their sectors can join the pact, subscribe the pact, and also work together across borders. A company in the sector can make an individual commitment or large-scale partnerships, subscribe to the Pact for Skills. This is not fresh funding, but we support it. The European Commission is supporting it in various ways. They can wear the flag, if you wish, but also we support in terms of making the funding jungle much more transparent than it used to be. So this is also something which we offer, and we will also put at the disposal of large-scale partnerships or regional partnerships support services for the implementation of their commitments under the pact.
I'd like to bring Jeff and Mike in with their best practices here, since we do have a worldview here present. If you could give us just briefly where you think the best practices you've seen are.
Well, I mean, there was so much great information that was just shared right there about, you know, things going on in other countries. There are many great things going on in the United States, but not often connected, not often at scale. For instance, the Ohio working with an organization called Ramtech. Ramtech working in a community in Ohio with major employers like Whirlpool and Honda, who had very specific needs of skilled people. Ramtech trained these people, and you know, hundreds of people, everybody they trained got jobs in local employers, and they couldn't satisfy the need. The state of Ohio put in something like $40 million. Very successful program, but too slow, not spread throughout the country. And so we see coal miners being retrained to do jobs that would be in manufacturing. I think Rockwell is training former military soldiers to come in and do some of these jobs. All great programs, not at scale. But the thing I wanted to comment on was what Anna said about the receptivity to working in automation and manufacturing, and how some countries, particularly in Asia, Japan embraced robotics technology early on, South Korea. I travel the world, you go to trade shows in those countries, there are children, small children in there playing with the technology. In the United States, you don't see that because of insurance rules. It would be dangerous to put the equipment around little kids. But there's a culture that says these technologies are good. They're not the Terminator. They're not our enemy. They're our friend. We need to work with them. And so I think that's a big issue in terms of driving demand. You can have all the training programs you want. You still have to have people who want to go into them, who want to go into manufacturing fields. And so all of us are doing our best in the US and other places in the world to describe how clean factories are and how great these jobs are compared to jobs of the past. But what happens? This first robotics program that I mentioned earlier, that hundreds of thousands of students participate in, when they graduate high school and college, they don't go into robotics. They go into fields that, engineering and computer science and other fields that maybe pay higher. Maybe they go to work for Google or Apple or something like that. We have to keep them involved in manufacturing type fields. And it's a difficult challenge, but, working as best we can to try and present this as a great future career opportunity. But it starts with people's behavior. In the US, the gold standard is a 4-year degree in a college, right? How do we get the gold standard to be going to a community college and technical schools to get these skills that would make you a valued employee in an increasingly automated world? That's the challenge.
Community colleges.
Mike?
In the US, they have community colleges.
Yes, yeah.
These are the places, no?
Of course, yeah. But culturally, though, it seems there's a level between high school, community college, university, and then post-graduate degrees. But to just give my opinion on this, first you need to separate two things. Number one is trying to change our school system to be better enabled to enable kids or students into this world. And so that's an area where trying to introduce robotics and automation at the high school level into, Felix, as you mentioned, the community college level, and then into the university level. And so that's an area that I think in particular the US is doing fairly well. I think the government, our government, provides funding at various levels for this, and so they do take a fairly hands-off approach at that level. But the schools, Jeff mentioned Ramtech in Ohio, but we have sold or donated over 3,000 industrial robots just in the United States into schools to teach students about industrial automation. And so this is the one side of the equation is trying to help schools teach more kids about robots and automation and advanced manufacturing. And then you have a separate challenge of upskilling existing labor that's already through school, that's already at the factory level. And Anna brought up some really good points about government's involvement there. And this is an area where I think our country is a bit weak in terms of creating rules and regulations that force training or that require employers to have their employees upskilled or trained. But we are working on that. We just started participating in a program with the government, with the Department of Labor in the United States, on a program called IRAP, which stands for Industry Recognized Apprenticeship Programs. And so what the government recognized is that they didn't know, maybe Felix, maybe some of your first comments is that you don't know too much about robots and automation. And our government took a similar approach, not just with robots and automation, but lots of fields that the government wants to work hard to do this, that they see the need of apprenticeship programs, but they don't know about the technology themselves. And so they created this industry recognized apprenticeship program and then started to work with lots of companies like ourselves and another big controls company called Rockwell Automation. And we got nominated to be what's called an SRE, a standards recognition entity. And so we're the ones that tell the industry what it takes. So we take some of the robots behind me, and we're the experts to say that to train a worker, you need to have this skill, this skill, this skill, and this skill. And then that is what gets then placed. And so the government utilizes us to determine what skills are needed, and then they sponsor those apprenticeships or work with the end customers. So I see it as two problems. we all mentioned right off the bat that everybody needs to pitch in. And so I see our role as being able to provide levels. So there's this level of skill, and we're the experts at that. There needs to be a role from the educational institutions to be able to provide that. There needs to be a role from industry to provide the skills to their employees. There needs to be a role from government to press the issue through different areas. And then honestly, some of it, especially with young children, it comes down to even a grassroots parental skill, so that you can enable your child that if they don't want to go to a four-year university and they want to enter a community college and learn a trade skill, that you have to be okay with that as a parent and embrace it like some of the other countries around the world. But that's an area that the US falls behind in a bit. So that's my perspective on it. But I think everybody's working on it, but we need to continue and maybe increase our attention even more, or else we wouldn't be here talking about it.
That's true. Can I take some of the questions from the audience, because we only have about 12 minutes left. We have a question here. Skills are important in the short term, but won't some sectors be fully automated in the future? Example, production. So anybody want to?
So there will be some areas, you know, for example, in the past, someone riding an ox in a field to till a field is something that doesn't exist anymore in countries around the world, because someone made a machine that made it better for the ox and better for the person. So to answer that question, I guess you could say yes, there will be those areas, but we produce more food than we've ever had as a world, as the world economy knows. So there will be some things, but in general, there won't be ever anything that doesn't require a person in some way, shape, or form.
Another question: manufacturing and automation is clear, but how can robots be implemented into quality assurance? Not just in production, how can they be implemented in quality assurance? I'm sure Fanuc have lots of ideas on that.
Yeah, that's actually an area. So there are really specialized cameras and vision systems now that enable automation to do a fair job at inspecting things. However, that also could lead to a spot where there still needs to be a level of human interaction, that trying to replicate the human sense of sight and the human sense of touch is a very, very challenging thing to replicate from an automation standpoint. So in that case, it really depends on what it is. If you're just trying to understand if a screw got placed into a device or whether a chip got placed onto a circuit board, then for certain automation is a good way for that. But trying to understand, say, maybe the surface quality of a leather IP panel that goes into a car, those are things that the sense of sight and the sense of touch of a person may be hard to replicate.
A question from one of my journalist colleagues: how important will it be in the future to work with robot operating systems, or will AI do the job in future of programming the robot?
I'll let Jeff answer that one, but I hope not, or else I'll be out of a job.
You know, the capabilities of AI to this point may be a bit overstated. The expectations are high, but you know, I think that AI will continue to develop. But we already talked about ease of programming. Mike had talked about you know, gesture control, basically, of automation, or pushing the arms around. So in many cases, you know, we're not going to need AI. There's also voice commands to technology that's becoming more popular. So I think, you know, there'll be people involved in that loop as well.
A final question we'll take from the audience before we go to the wrap up. Would a robot manufacturer, for example, pass content on micro-learning to institutes like the German Industry 4.0 campus to catch more people with real applications, lifelong learning by real cases and little theory lessons? Not sure what the question mark is there, but
lifelong learning, you have to provoke the curiosity of learners in early stage. You must start in early childhood education, basically. If you want to get the people have this curiosity for lifelong learning, there you have to start. In fact,
I agree, Felix. Actually, this during COVID, I bought a 3D printer for my children. I have a 12, well, I guess he's 14 now, but 13-year-old, and now he turned 14, and also a 15-year-old that's about to turn 16. And because we were stuck at home, we figured we'd try to do some manufacturing of ourselves at home. So I bought a 3D printer, but I think these are the steps that we need to foster for lifelong learning, to introduce many things to our own families and children to provoke those types of thoughts, and that goes to show what could be held in the future. But to answer the question, maybe Ken, that you presented, it is our role. That is our role, is to assist governments and universities and areas with real applications. And so there's a lot of examples of that. I know of specific ones in America where in the state of Alabama, the government funded a technology park where anybody in the state of Alabama can utilize that if they live in that state. And we provided robots and automation doing a real system. It's an incredible, huge factory, robots of every single brand, not just ours, but everything. And they produce, fake things there, but anyone can go in and from that state to go learn at will. And I think that's our responsibility, is to work with states and governments to provide that technology. So certainly I think that's important for us.
The wrap-up question was going to be on COVID, but rather than talk a bit more about COVID, I'd rather take some more of the questions here from the people who are listening in. Do you think that companies will take over more and more of the specific upskilling process in the coming cobot future, in the collaborative robot future? Is it going to come down to companies doing the upskilling there? That's a little bit what Anna talked about as well.
No, I think so. I think it will be much needed if you as a company want to perform well and you introduce cobotic systems. You need to do it, obviously. I think it is a mutual interest for companies, for robotic producers and for workers to anticipate what training needs are needed together, and to also co-create the training manuals together yet again. So I think that there will be an increase in that, but that does not preclude the need to precisely to work on adapting maybe a little bit the educational system to future training needs, as everybody has already said, but also to equip universities, colleges, community colleges, VET providers, etc., with the equipment that they need, but also the trainers and the teachers, etc., with the time to have the right skills themselves to be able to teach all of that. And I think that relates to the fact that precisely robotics producers would be best positioned to provide advice on that, on truly what is needed to operate your machine well, who is needed for that, which types of workers, who is doing what, etc. And that will also allow for automation not to go overboard. To come back to the automation question, because I think that we all strive for quality production, quality products, for accuracy, for health and safety for the worker while operating systems, etc., and for well-being at work, and for tacit knowledge to develop and innovation to spread. So I think that there are mutual interests in that, and therefore workplace learning should and hopefully will grow.
A last question from the audience. What about humanoid robots? What's the future of this kind of robot? I suppose Stana can take that one.
Because I look so happy while hearing about them. No, I think it depends. In elder care, something like that can be useful in terms of providing some sort of more interaction, semi-human interaction for older people in elder care. Things like that can be useful. On the other hand, I think there is a lot of investment going into these systems, a lot of money, but I'm not sure how helpful they truly are in achieving some of the results firms want to achieve or the industry wants to achieve. So I'm very hesitant on that topic. And the results that I've seen so far in terms of what humanoid robots look like at this point are frankly like not that promising or exciting, and sometimes scary, to be frank.
Yeah, actually, FANUC focuses exclusively on industrial manufacturing, but it is growing. What we consider industrial manufacturing is growing. Jeff mentioned that we do have robots making food in restaurants, but we consider this a manufacturing environment where the operators are trained and skilled operators of the automation. But applying or utilizing a robot or automation on an unskilled person, which is what a humanoid robot or a home robot or a healthcare robot would do, it's definitely not FANUC's business, but there is an effort out there. And Jeff, you cover many of those regions, so it might be best for you to comment on that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting developments. I think we're a long way from having a useful humanoid in our home that can do multitasks, because there's so many challenges in a home that are different from a factory environment, for instance. But one of the developments that's really interesting is from Sarcos, where you put on this suit. It's to help you lift heavy things or do operations. That's the kind of humanoid type robot that I could see really taking off because of the value that it provides. Again, is augmenting the worker, doing tasks that they couldn't do otherwise, easily lifting things. So I think there's some important developments that are taking place there, but still a long way to go.
Okay, I'd like to wrap up the discussion. Thank you to all four of you, to Jeff, to Anna, to Mike, and to Felix. And also thank you to the Messe Munich for organizing the talk today. As we announced at the beginning, the Automatica Sprint will take place in Munich from June 22nd to 24th. So we look forward to seeing you there. Stay safe until then. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panel.